So you're watching season 1, episode 1 of The Startup. It's a new series or a new story or mini series in the Unknown podcast. There's a lot to digest there, but basically it's going to be a journey I'm going to take you guys on. This is episode 1. Episode 2 and 3 follow this, which are two separate ideas. Hope you enjoy it.
Sure. There we go. We are officially recording. Tij Bedi, how are you?
Pretty good, man. So nervous.
Good.
So
Good.
nervous.
Oh,
So nervous.
So welcome to another episode of The Unspoken, where we go behind the scenes to reveal what's not said and not written about, and what goes on in the minds of great people or ordinary people. Simply, what goes on behind the scenes, what goes on in the boardrooms, what goes on in conference calls and meetings that nobody talks about, let alone wants to get revealed. We get behind the drivers that inspire people to continue a journey against all odds, and we actually examine the barriers that they put up or other people put up and how they maybe deal with those barriers. And in this episode, it's the start of a new season, and the season's called The Startup. So Tij and I have agreed to go on this journey together, and we're going to take the listener on a journey from ideation to product development to funding to hiring to firing and hopefully monetization of a product or an application or a company or a service that we're going to build in front of your eyes.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is about this particular journey that we're going to be on is that we haven't decided on what the product is. We haven't decided on what to do yet. So
Yep.
the listeners are going to be taking on that journey themselves. We may even have an episode called The Decision, but it's going to start with evaluating various ideas and talking through them and how an entrepreneur like ourselves or entrepreneurs like ourselves actually go through that process. We hope that it results in something tangible, material that you can sink your teeth into. And we hope it's not just a dud, because one thing's certain for me, in my perspective, and I think Tij would attest to this, is that I don't like to just talk, I like to do. And whether it's my money or somebody else's money that goes into it, I typically think of 200 really, really life-changing ideas a year, and maybe one gets to the point where I'm actually putting fingers on a keyboard and actually creating something other than just a PowerPoint presentation or conversation. So over the course of the season, which may last 3 months or 3 years, don't know yet. Well, of course we don't know yet because we haven't figured it out. We're going to let the listeners in on pitches. We're going to let them in on discussions amongst ourselves, pitches to investors. We're going to have them in rooms where we're interviewing key people. We're going to give them a behind the scenes look at actually how the product gets developed. So we're going to do screen shares. It's exciting for some people, not terribly exciting for other people. And we're going to talk about the competitive landscape. We're going to talk about the long ball versus the short ball, playing in the big leagues versus playing in the minor leagues, the advantages, disadvantages of each, et cetera, et cetera. And we're going to start this journey today. So before I start, I want to thank our sponsors, which we don't have any sponsors, so I could skip this point. But the backdrop of this, for those that don't know me or don't know Tij, is that I've started 4 technology companies and been the co-founder of another one. Vencast was an online brokerage firm for private equity and venture capital deal distribution. Fitmu was an online social marketplace where Tij was my CTO and partner in that for health, fitness, and wellness. We sold that one. I sold Vencast as well. LeadMe, which was and it still is a sophisticated data-driven matching application for real estate, or it's specifically for homeowners looking for real estate agents. So it uses data to select the best agent. And I co-founded a company called Bump.com. And then, of course, there's Smarter Sales, which I'm working on right now, which we're not going to dive into. I've gotten that to the point where it's an MVP. It's being looked at seriously by some very large asset management organizations to possibly make an investment. So I'll take you on that journey slowly but surely, but it's not going to be a major part of this discussion. And that's a data science and AI application for distribution of financial products. And then there's this one. This will be the fifth. And the fifth could be a rehashing of one of the other ones, or it might be something completely new. And I'm really excited to go on this journey with you, Tij. And my partner and co-host, who's on the line with me, unfortunately we can't be in the same studio together, is Tij Bedi. He's been a friend for many, many years. He's an experienced technology executive working, a very senior executive working at one of the largest technology companies in the world. He's also an experienced entrepreneur. And I can attest to that myself because he was helping me from day one, basically at FitMu, helping build and shape the product and ultimately through a monetization event. And besides being a great friend, he's also remarkably talented in a lot of other disciplines, including singing, and a genuinely nice person. So he also has one other quality, and given that he's on this line with me and we're doing this podcast together in this season, he obviously has a lot of patience because I can drive people nuts. So
yeah,
I wanted to jump right into it. That was a long-winded introduction. So Tij, welcome again. This is number 2. Hopefully we'll be talking number 20 with a real product and a real service or something. I would just like to kick it off and let you say a few words, and then just briefly sort of lead us down this journey. I have 4 concepts, 4 technologies to talk about, and we could talk about each one of them. We could dissect each one. We could do a deeper dive into one of them or all of them. And then, but I think what we'd like to do is probably limit this to like 45 minutes. And then what we can do is use the next episode to sort of do a deeper dive into one of the choosing.
yeah. Jeff, thank you for having me back. It was fun doing it the first time around. I think it's going to be even more fun. Maybe this is the product. This is the product, maybe.
I know. We can't make any money doing podcasts unless you're Joe Rogan. And
don't assume, man. That's the foundation of lean product development. You never assume. You let the customer talk. So thank you for having me back.
My pleasure. Tij, on that subject, and I don't want to interrupt you, but on the podcast idea, it was funny. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and we were talking about how podcasts literally weren't in existence 10 years ago. People thought they were just like weird. And I remember even talking to my brother and other people. It's like, oh, have you listened to this podcast? What's that? It's this, well, it's talk radio, but it's on the web. Why would I want to do that? And now you've got at least 5 million podcasts going in the US alone. You've got people generating hundreds of millions of dollars, including Joe Rogan, who I mentioned, and Tim Ferriss. And you name it. I listen to them all. Famous authors are typically doing a podcast around their books or some idea. And some of them are 5 minutes and some of them are long form. I particularly favor the long form, but the podcast concept has really blown up, and this is a video cast as well. And so I think that it's going to be very important to show people, in this particular case, what we're talking about, show them screens and videos and concepts and drawings, because that's all part of the whole startup process, right?
Yeah. No, I think, look, podcasts might have a specific meaning, but like for a lot of people, it's just listening to like-minded people talking about things that you may be curious about. Like most of us are curious beings who like learning. We might not explicitly say it in that exact manner, but most of us are curious beings who like learning. And, because of being human and all, we like to learn from people that we find comfortable, or we have commonality in. And this is a forum that lets people see the, look, this is not programmed. If you don't, it's improvised. So it shows us who we really are, and then people who will agree with us, they will want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And then that's what it is. Like it's sort of like social in a lot of ways. And look, it's not a podcast, right? And maybe the product is how do you develop things in groups with strangers or people you've never met before. but that's what we do, right? In real life too. It's just that there's a paycheck in the way, but we're doing that every day. Right? So isn't that what a job is? You go into something and the outcome, right? Look, I think people who look at a job and the outcome is a paycheck,
Yeah.
they usually have a different outcome that they're looking for, and their growth usually is happening somewhere outside, and their job is paying for that. And a lot of people then come to a job and they look for the actual outcome that they want to produce, not just the paycheck. And those are the people that we will be basically talking to a lot. uh, I feel like the
Yeah.
journey
It's
of
a, no,
building a product
it's a good
is very
point.
important.
It's a good point because I guess what you're saying also is that you're inviting our listeners into this conversation with us, and we hope that
Yeah,
it kind of fires some synapses, it ignites some passion in them, that maybe
yeah,
they share their own journey with us, which is absolutely great because our job here is to inspire. That's like the
yep,
purpose of this podcast, The Unspoken, is to inspire. Um, but also these people may want to come on this journey with us. We might find some gems. We might find a needle in the haystack. We might use this as a recruiting tool. We might find that it's listened to by a cousin of yours who then refers it to somebody in India, who refers it to somebody in Silicon Valley, and they say, hey, you know what, this is really interesting. Let me learn more about this. I may want to fund it.
yeah, yeah.
And you never
I mean,
know how it's
I
going to
have
go.
cousins all over the world, but yeah, India is also good. Had to put that in, Jeff. So
Hey, we're all from,
you're such an you're
from
such an American
Africa,
man.
right?
You're such an
We're all from
American.
Africa.
um, no, you're right. Like, look, I think
Touche.
there's this really good article I read about how Saturday Night Live. The reason why it's so funny is one of the reasons is because a lot of people with a lot of diverse opinions sit together and they come up with this skit.
Mm,
Meaning, even if you have five people with different skill sets, even different five skill sets, there are like so
yep.
many skill sets in this universe. If you have those five sitting in a room,
Yep.
they can find so many. Like it's all about, at the end of the day, it's patterns. And then when you talk about a subject, patterns emerge, and then that's where something new can born. Innovation comes from taking variations of either things that are already existing, or something you want to build. So if you take a lot of different skills, I feel like diversity is very important to innovation. So if we can get a lot of people to engage, maybe one of the metrics, Jeff, we should try to keep for this is how many people can we actually engage as part of our conversation? Like, how many
Yeah,
people
yeah,
are
yeah.
willing to come on and actually
Yep.
talk to us, even if it's 4 or 5? I think within a month or 2 months,
Yeah.
that would be a huge win for us.
It would be. It'd be a big win, because I believe one of my purposes in this world and in this life is to actually inspire others. And sometimes that only means needing to touch one person, because that
Yeah,
one person has a network of another seven, and that's those seven people. It's exponential, right? Have another seven, and the multiplication factor just ultimately could result in changing somebody's life for the better. And I always look back on those touch points, and always look back to where I've affected somebody. And I just hope I've made a difference, a positive difference, with some of the companies I've built, with some of the things I've said, with maybe being an example to certain people in terms of whether it's fitness, health, or wellness, or just passion and enthusiasm. And I remember my sister saying once, Jeff, you're the only person I know that can be beaten down by it with a 2x4 over the head and just keep getting up and up and up and shaking off the dust and doing it with a smile on your face. And I
I
was
can
like,
attest. I can attest to that.
I was
I can
like,
attest to
Jen,
that. I've seen it happen.
there is no alternative. What do I do? Not get out of bed? I mean,
But a lot of
what's
people
that?
don't do that, right? And a lot of people don't do that. And maybe this is a very important point to make is, before you start, there are these sort of underlying qualities that some of the entrepreneurs have that they may or may not even know they're doing, but they're needed. I think this
Yeah.
is a very important one, where you don't give up, where you have a vision, you don't know how to get to the vision, but you know that if you try enough number of times, you're going to get somewhere.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's an
I,
important thing to learn.
I think you're right. And that for a first time entrepreneur, that's very important. It's a numbers game, where just take your best idea and actually put it into action, because action is the only thing that matters. And that's my one word of advice. I'm not going to give any other advice here. But if you don't act on it, you're just talk. And talkers don't get anywhere with their lives, with whatever. You just have to act. And it doesn't matter whether you hit a brick wall, because that's going to result in some sort of learning experience, right? And it's not a failure. It's, what do they say? It's not a failure, but it's just one more step towards the right solution, one more step towards a successful
Yeah.
product. And so it's a numbers game. So for me though, what's interesting, Tij, on that point that you just made, is that I become a little faster, a little bit more critical of myself, and I'm able to drop things much more quickly than I was in the past. Like, I'm able to evaluate whether something is just ludicrous, something's crazy, what I've done is I've become a little bit more cautious as well in proceeding down a route, knowing that it may end up, there's a 98% chance it's going to end up as zero, right? It's binary. It's a 1 or 2% chance of success, maybe 3 or 4 if you're really good, and that the rest of it's usually failure, if not some sort of tail, long tail. So in this case, I think that I've been able to figure out what's going to be absolutely guaranteed a failure, because I either have to boil the ocean, I have to come up with $100 million to fund something because it's too complicated. Or the worst thing, and this is one of my big mistakes in the past, is that I've been 20 years ahead of the curve. I've been 20 years ahead of human thinking or the way that they operate. And I'm trying to pull them with me, right? And it's tug of war. And I'm like, no, I'm here. And then I want to go here, and they're here. And it has nothing to do with intelligence. It's just that's my vision for the world, or for a way of being, or for efficiencies, as we talked about in the last podcast. And you wish that they could come on this journey with you, but they're back here and they're stuck, and they're not stuck because they want to be stuck. They're stuck because they're part of a process, or they're just comfortable there, and they don't want to change their iPhone out every 2 seconds. They don't need 3D glasses, or like a Google Glass, or they don't.
So I think we should, this is a very important thing you're making, right? We should use this as a leeway to where to start.
Yeah.
And from what I've learned is that the first thing to do is bring whoever you're trying to convince into your problem space, right? Like, a lot of times when you're selling something, like whatever the new version of the iPhone or the 3D glass you're talking about is, they don't understand the problem you're trying to solve. And most of the times we all suffer from assuming, like I do, that people around me are smarter than me. So then I get confused on, or I would not invest the energy in showing them the problem that we need to solve. And I think that is very important, especially when you're making disruptive innovation, right?
Yeah.
Incremental innovation, everybody knows, right? Like we were just talking about before we started, you can make the camera
better,
whatever, but just better, like 0.1% better or 0.3% better, and then let the branding take it all, right? But that's not what you are talking about. What you're talking about is a world where, well, the phones are solving a communication problem, so there are more than one way of solving the communication problem, or whatever problem the iPhone is solving. I think it only solves the photo problem now, which is sad. But I mean, the damn thing is going to have 40 cameras in the back soon. But but that's suffering. I think the products are suffering a little bit from the same thing you're saying, that people don't want to invest into teaching people. But it's not teaching; it's bringing them into your problem space. Like look at Elon Musk, right? When he started building the rocket, he was able to do it because he had that $250 million from the PayPal sale, and he was able to march on this journey. I think the key is, like, how do you march on this journey when you don't have $250 million, right? Like, how do you get there, right? Even he started with PayPal, which was revolutionary, but it wasn't crazy, right?
So did Bezos with an investment in Google. He was in the first round of Google, $250,000, and that set him on path where he could actually explore and experiment and actually fail without having to really worry about it. Now Musk, in his book, if you read it, actually blew through a lot of his eBay money and he ended up sleeping on the couch of his wife's parents' place and not being able to make payroll over one Christmas for Tesla. And he had to go and beg, borrow, and steal from the VCs to actually get it funded. And at which point it became, it was too big to fail at that point. So they needed to fund it. So so that story aside, so what you're really talking about is identifying a real problem and not inventing one, and making sure you're solving that problem with something. But I would take that further. So not only identify a problem, there's a lot of problems in this world, but you have to, number one, make sure there's a business there, unless you want to do a charitable organization or a .org. And number two, how do you help solve that problem? Not necessarily solve the entire problem, but how do you help solve that problem with an application that will be uh, basically used by a lot of people, or used by the few, but pay you a lot of money for that. So back to the business side of it.
Yeah.
You need adoption, and you need people to then spread the word. And if you come out with something that is, less than suitable for them to use, it's too complicated, it's clunky, it's buggy, whatever it is, it just doesn't work. It's solving the problem. You might have identified the right problem, but you just have the wrong solution for it. And so, and there's 100 ways of attacking a problem. And I'll give you an example. So let's dive into 4 or 5 different technologies, some of which I've built and some of which I haven't already. And I'll tell you one sentence about them, and then I'll tell you one sentence about the problem that we're solving. But you'll see in each case, there's a different angle of attack for each one. And the challenge that I have is figuring out which is the easiest path to monetization, which is the easiest path to adoption, which is the easiest path to actually building something and getting it noticed, getting it out there, getting it used by some sort of subset of people, that they're almost like an online focus group. It's like what Guy Kawasaki said, ship it and be crappy. Just get it the fuck, excuse my language, get it the fuck out there and get it used. So let me just go through the list for you, Tij. It's like 4 or 5, and then and then let's talk about the one that kind of grabs you, and then we'll talk about maybe a second one on this one. But you remember LeadMe, right? I talked to you about LeadMe.
Yep.
LeadMe is an application that could be transported into numerous industries. I started with the real estate industry, and basically it's a matching engine for homeowners looking for real estate agents. There's a big difference between a good agent and a bad agent. And a bad agent doesn't sell your house. A good agent sells it very quickly for a very good price. Not necessarily the best price in the world, but a good price. Everybody walks away with a house sold and the transaction done. That's a good agent. And it's hard to identify the good agents because there are so many agents out there with big marketing budgets. They hang up signs everywhere. They put up billboards, and there's no data-driven decision-making for homeowners to rely on that is anything but marketing and fluff right now. I mean, trust me. What I did there is I reverse engineered all of the MLS data in a particular area, and I licensed it myself. And then I built a proprietary algorithm that allowed homeowners to input some key statistics, and out popped the top 10 agents in that neighborhood and in that category. And then I would rank them all with each one of them. So I'll just quickly share my screen, and I'll show you exactly what that looks like. Share my screen. I'll show you what that looks like. That LeadMe. Let's see. Oops. Let me see if I have LeadMe up. But LeadMe was and still is today. It was here we go. Here's the LeadMe. So proprietary matching algorithm. And I basically did this in Excel with some Russian programmer. He was great. I used him. He would moonlight with me at night, and we created this scoring system for all of the agents using about 20 different statistics. And I was able to match them against each other and put them against each other and create a scorecard for them. So this is the scorecard of some agents and it was quite obvious which ones would rise to the top and which ones we would want to use for certain types of properties. So the second concept was, so that just so you know where that is, I still own the IP, I still own the code. I made a lot of money actually doing it on my own. So it's been out there, I proved it. it's just, I needed a couple $1,000,000, I think, to take it to the next level. And I decided to go and focus on something else instead of, it's difficult to raise money on your own, basically.
Yeah.
And I talked to a lot of the top agencies. I talked to the Department of Justice, who was wondering whether I was doing anything illegal. I'm like, no, I'm just reverse engineering data that I licensed. And everybody really liked it, except this was the problem, Tij. They all were stuck in the old way of doing business, which was, I'm either a sell side agent or I'm a buy side agent. I'm going to go and do marketing on Zillow, and I'm going to go find my clients. Well, why don't we let the clients find you? Why don't we do that? And if you're at a cocktail party and you're not qualified to take on that $5 million house, why don't you refer it to somebody using my application? And then you get paid a third of that referral. You get paid a third of the commission for doing nothing but using my app. And that the business model is incredible. I mean, it's the best business model I've ever seen, because you can spend thousands of dollars on customer acquisition because you're making about $8,000 to $10,000 per transaction just from referring it to a good agent. And so I really like that model. Now, I was spending less than $400 for customer acquisition, and I was getting checks for $5,000 to $30,000 on a regular basis.
Okay? I remember the success of that.
Yeah. So the second thing is the CRS. I don't know whether you remember this, Tij.
So I think we should go one at a time, right? Because people won't be able to keep up.
Oh yeah, that's true.
The subject. Let's go one by one.
Okay.
By the way, just a tip, Jeff, when you go outside the screen presentation, there are modes in Zoom where you can have cameras side by side. If you do side by side camera, it's more engaging. It's something that we can try. Anyhow, so look, I think LeadMe, there are two problems you're trying to solve there, right? There's an internal problem of the real estate industry, which is that it's very bureaucratic and too process driven. It's too much process, and things that are seemingly simple take too long. That's one problem they have. And then the real problem that you're solving for external side for the customer is customers don't really care who's selling my house. They just want a lot of money for it, or the best bang for the buck, best price for the house, and they want to get rid of it immediately when they list it for that amount, right? So if you draw two axes, you're looking at that. If the axis is the horizontal axis is sale price, and then this is least amount of time it takes to sell. They want to be on the top right. It's like it sold very quickly for a lot of money, right? Now, obviously, the salespeople are enabling it. So the problem you're solving from the external side is sell quickly for the most amount of price. And then internally, I think
with the highest probability of selling, because that's a big
sell it quickly for the for the highest amount of price. And I think that's the external problem you're solving. And I think if I look at it from a user perspective, it's a very relatable problem, because it's difficult. You got to get a thing. The fees are high, and even if the fees are high, it's not always simple. Which the simplicity though comes from the internal problem of the agency, which is that it's very bureaucratic, too process driven. Right? So you're solving actually two problems, not really one problem. They're connected in your solution, but there are two problems. Like the data part is solving the internal problem, which is that finding that right agent who can get the most for your house, right? Not just the best agent in the facility, right? And I see this problem not just in this industry, it's in a lot of industries. But I think if you had to classify this in a 2020 terms, it's really a gig economy problem that you're solving, because what you could potentially be looking at meeting two demands and supplies, which is people have homes or people want to buy homes, and then they want to find the inventory and say, like at scale of this application, everybody is their own agent, right? Like you could think about it that way. It's probably going to go through sales people because of the regulations, and maybe that's where it stays and it never comes out of it. But at the end of the day, everybody or anybody can go and start selling, right? Like I think it's got a gig economy aspect to it, but it starts from within the
Yeah,
the industry.
I don't want to get too specific about the technology, but it's revolutionary in the fact that I'm able to engage people that are licensed and unlicensed to use the technology. So
That's what I'm
imagine
saying. That's why it's
imagine
peaked.
yeah, imagine an agency with say 1,000 agents, right? They could use it internally and it could be white labeled so that everybody's referring business to each other and they're all sharing clients much more effectively. So that instead of you competing with everybody on the outside, you're actually saying, you know what, I may not be qualified to sell your house on this street in this neighborhood for $5
Yeah.
million, but I'm going to refer it to a team inside. We have this with this technology. So that's one way of using it. The other way is intra agency. So from agency A to agency B, and there's an agreement, there's a referral agreement, and that this technology can be used to actually restrict it, not open it up to the world, but restrict it to those two agencies or restrict it by geography. And the other way that the technology can be used, which is really interesting, is it can actually compensate non-licensed um, um, representatives, consultants of the company who use the technology to refer business to licensed agents. And I've figured out a way working with top legal minds to actually assist them in servicing their clients if they're a lawyer or they're an architect or they're a builder or developer. They in the past would just refer it, through a friend to a friend and get a bottle of wine at the end of the day. Now they can
Yeah.
actually be part of this process.
So how
So
would you define the problem that you're solving from via LeadMe in the first phase? It seems like you're solving the internal problem, which is make it seamless to actually uh, find the best agent for the house, right? That's the
yeah, that's the
is
big problem.
that's the but what I'm saying is there's a bigger problem, a bigger potential bigger problem, which is linked. I don't know if it's bigger or not, but the person who's selling the house, at the end of the day, the problem they have is they're not able to quickly sell their house for the best price, right? That is the
Right.
main problem. Like this is linked to that problem, I feel like, because
Yep.
the agency that does it is the MLS or the realtor agency, right? So you might be solving the problem that all the processes that are built in that have slowed down and hindered that outcome. The outcome is that a person should be able to sell their house for a lot of money very quickly, or the best, but they should be able to get the best price for the house as quickly as possible, right? Like at the end of the day, that should be the vision of that.
Yep.
Would you
Yep.
agree?
Well, yeah, there's oftentimes an internal struggle that's happening also with homeowners who have a relationship with a pre-existing broker who bought them the house, and oftentimes it's not the right agent to sell the house, or they have a cousin's mother's son's brother, or that's don't worry about following that trail, but you know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about, who has, one leg and everybody feels sorry for them. And they need to hire that agent because they need to give them $20,000 a commission versus somebody else because they're starving. And I'm being facetious there and not so kind facetious, but I'm giving you an example of actually an internal struggle that happens at least 50% of the time, where people are sitting there struggling with who to hire. And what I do is I help take the emotion out of that. All they have to say now is I'm using actually the LeadMe system, which is data driven, to find the right agent here. And let me take you out to dinner. And if they really wanted to, they could just give them money, because at the end of the day, they're going to end up with a delta on the price that they sold the house at with an agent that I referred them to, or this technology referred them to, that's going to be much greater than ultimately the money that they would have paid this agent. So they could be charitable, and they could actually make a lot more money for their house, and that was shown by the data, because I ended up
Yeah.
selling about 20 different houses using this technology through agents I referred it to, and we had 100% success rate. Everybody was like, where were you? Why didn't this exist before? This is incredible. This is very sophisticated. And I said, well, nobody's taking the time to really understand how to actually present this data. So
Well,
100% of the time,
but that's a very important point, Jeff. Like,
yep,
nobody cares about the data. You have to understand, well, what we have to understand as entrepreneurs is the homeowner, you can tell them I have a lot of data and I can help you. But at the end of the day, they're looking for a very specific outcome, which is get me the most money you can for my house tomorrow, right?
Yep.
That's the vision, right? So I think starting with that, if that was the problem statement, I think LeadMe fits into that and starts moving on solving that or getting that outcome. And the
Yeah,
way
I
it's
mean,
doing it is powerful. I think it's
yeah,
relatable in terms of execution. Everybody
yep.
talks about data these days. Everybody talks about AI. Everybody talks about algorithms, right? So it's relatable on the internal side, and it's very relatable on the external side because selling and buying homes is a need that is just
Well,
it's not going anywhere
no,
until
it's not
now.
going anywhere anytime soon. There's no buy now button on Zillow. There may be at some point when it
Well,
becomes
not
its own
yet, but
agency. No, but
yeah,
you know why there's not, Tij, is because it relies on everybody to advertise on its platform. The minute it starts competing with everybody, every other agent, it's going to have a problem attracting the advertising dollars. So it's chosen the advertising model versus the agency model. So it's supporting the agents versus competing against them.
well, so you're
So,
saying it's incremental in the way it's solving the problem, and I think that's
yep.
where that's where that small shift comes in. Is do you want to solve the problem incrementally, or do you want to disrupt the whole damn thing,
No,
right?
so this is
And
this is yeah, this is an interestingly enough,
yeah, this is incremental.
it's incremental because what it's doing is adding the third element to it, and the third element is actually referrals. So it's you've got listing side agents that help you list a house and get it sold. You got buyer
Yeah,
side agents that help you go and find a house, and they drive you around and show you different houses and kitchens. And then you've got this thing called referrals, and nobody really focuses on referrals, but referrals
yeah,
is the third leg of the stool, and I have the engine that drives referrals. And referrals can make an agent 3 to 10 times more money in actually less time, working less time than if they were to take on listings or do buy side or a combination
yeah,
thereof, because referrals don't take a lot of time. You use the application, you show them the data. They say, great, how do I get access to these anonymous agents or these better agents? And you say, sign here, and I'll
yeah.
refer them to you. And that the referral goes out and it's all automated. So it's an incremental element, but it's a refocusing on helping those, not only the homeowners, Dish, because it's helping the homeowners make the selection. They're the ones that ultimately pay the commission. So they're ultimately the customer. But the people that you want using this are agents that are willing to embrace a third way of selling, which is referrals,
Yeah,
are people that are licensed and not doing any business, and they want to
yeah,
they want to do business, they want to make money. Or there's a lot of people that aren't licensed that want to refer clients in, and they want to make some cash, because they have a
yeah.
great network of people that are selling houses because of their profession. And
Actually, you're making a very important point, Jeff. So, in your train of thought, if you think about it, I think you're making you're making an excellent point in terms of how to get started, right? So, I think the roadmap to success, from my experience, from what I've seen or read, is there are three major components: vision, consistency, which is the how you do the process, and then hard work and execution, right? And so I think what I was saying before was that to bring people into what you're doing, I think you have to leverage vision. It's like, hey, how cool would it be if one day you just pressed a button and your house was sold for the best maximum price, within X amount of time, right? But then I think as you look at that sort of forest problem, because the problem is a forest itself, right? There are all these other trees that are problems in there. I think what you're saying is, although you might not be solving the main problem on the get-go, you are picking up a significant portion of the problem and starting to solve that first, right?
yeah,
So it's part of that sort of problem tree, if you may, or the decision tree.
well,
And that's important because you can do that, right? You can still make money from that because
you can
as
make a
long as
lot
you're
of money
moving
from that,
closer to,
Dish.
well, if you're moving closer to the vision, but that vision is very important because it keeps your bearings right? Like you're not going to get lost into just making pennies in the world of referrals. At the end of the day, that you're still pegged to help the consumer, but you're
Yep.
starting by cleaning up this process, right? I'll give you a very, very unrelated, sort of overlapping problem. Like one of the things that one of the things that a lot of technologists have to do is when you especially managing a large team is You have to create smoothness on releases that happen on a day in and day out basis, right? But now you can't, let's say you have 10 teams that work on different things, but they come together and they release, right? Now you can just imagine they might be working on a large application, different parts of the application. They may not have interest or time to actually pay attention to what other people are doing. But we know that that is very important in terms of collaboration that comes when you have to do a successful release, especially when it's happening quite frequently. So that's a problem that you need to solve, which is how do you make production releases very smooth? But then if you start breaking it apart, one of the things you might find is, oh, the first problem you need to solve is you have to have very fast QA, right?
Yep.
So first you got to go solve QA, because if your QA is not really fast, you're not going to be able to release fast, right? Or if your product
It's all about
features are
QA.
very complicated, it's
Yep.
not going to be, it's going to be difficult to produce. It's related to what you're saying, because what you're saying is, look, that is the problem I want to solve. People should be able to sell their houses quickly for the most amount of price they can get. But right now, this little hairball here, if you solve that problem, it will produce a great result towards that. And then that itself is a business.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying, right? That itself is a business. That referral aspect is the business itself. So I think in terms of the bigger conversation we're having, pick a vision. The vision should be a very big problem, then break it apart into smaller problems and see if any of those problems can be big enough to turn into its own business. Now,
Yeah.
that's the question, Jeff. Maybe someone like me would ask you, what are the attributes of this problem that tell you if it could become a business? How would we classify that? Like, what are the attributes that tell you that
Well,
should be a business of its own?
the first thing you do is you ask, has it been tested? So that's the first thing you ask, because if it's been tested and it's generated revenue, then it can be, there's proof that there's a market for it. How big that is, you can extrapolate. But in this particular case, it was tested in a geographic area, which was, lower Fairfield County, Connecticut. And a lot of work was put into this. I funded it 100% myself, and I made a ton of money on a relative basis. I made more money, and I specifically became an agent to determine whether there's a technology solution to drive efficiencies into this process of selling a house, because it's still all backwards, right? It's completely backwards. It's too expensive, and everybody's been chipping away at it.
Yep.
But most people have been chipping away at it this way to get a business going. They've been focusing on supporting the agents and the agencies with technology, or providing an advertising platform for them, which is the same thing. And, there's very few significant changes that have occurred in the industry, because it's got one of the largest constituency bases of 2.5 million registered agents out there who voice concern if there's a material change in the way that they generate revenues. So number one, I would say, is it tested? Number two, I would say, how many people have you spoken to? Is there a focus group out there that you've spoken to? And what have they expressed as their pain point? A lot of people have said it's ridiculous that I pay 6% commission to sell a house. It should be as easy as pushing a button. But it's the most significant transaction in their lives typically. And it's like buying a car. They're going online. It just takes time. It's not going to be easy for you to drop the commissions down from 6 to 5 to 4, split those between the buy side and the sell side, and have people give a shit. I mean, it's a race to the bottom at the end of the day, because these agents have to make money. So you could say, well, there's too many agents. Yeah, there are too many agents. So you make the testing harder, or the qualifications harder. You have to turn them into PhDs to become an agent so that they can get paid more money. So there's fewer of them. There's all these issues, and you're not gonna change things overnight. So you have to embrace the fact that you've got a good 20 years in front of us before people are able to click sell now and buy now on a computer, and people will trust that, because they're going to be living in this house for a long period of time. They want to smell the paint. They want to look at the walls. They want to actually feel it. And so there's 3D technology that allow you to do walkthroughs, and it accelerates the process. It pre-screens them, it pre-qualifies them, and it helps the agents do their job better. but it's still not to the point where you're going to buy a $2.5 million piece of property or a boat or anything for that matter without
So
looking at it, right?
proof of concept, and within proof of concept, talk to the actual customers, the consumers of the proof of concept to see if they are,
not
if
just
the
of the proof of
problem
concept.
exists.
Talk to as many people as you can and ask them
in the problem space, right? Like the people who
in the
supposedly
problem
with the
space.
problem. Yeah.
But the great thing about this, Tij, is that in this particular case, in real estate, everybody's in that problem. You know,
That's right.
everybody, whether it's renting or buying a condo or a house or an estate, and selling it, same thing. It's everybody's part of this problem. Commercial real estate, the same thing. Everybody has this problem. In commercial real estate, it's even worse because they pay a lot more commission. They sell 10-year, they sign 10-year leases and they pay these ridiculous $1 to $5 million to $15 million commissions, and everybody gets rich. And so anyway, make a long story short, this can be applied to the commercial space as well. So 2 was talk to as many people as possible to see whether it's actually a problem and what the solution would be. Now, a lot of people don't have patience to say, like, they can't imagine it. They can't sit there and say, oh, I could imagine, you know, a scorecard being, you know, having these 20 statistics and an algorithm weighting them with some sort of scoring system and a dynamic application to allow you to adjust prices in neighborhoods. They can't do that. They don't want to do that. So you have to show them actually a product, either a demo of a product or a real product. And you have to say, what do you think of this? And if they say, I don't get it, you got a problem, because they got to get it. Right? And the users of it have to get it. And the people that are the recipients of it that don't even use it have to understand its value. If somebody were to bring this to you,
the proof of concept is needed to have that conversation with these customers. You're saying, like, you should have some level of materialization of your idea, so that people can even, you know, they can either speak for it or against it.
Well, the only other way of getting a business like this funded without some sort of product or MVP, minimally viable product, for those that don't know what that means, or proof of concept, you know, POC or demo, is if they have a resume and they're attached to their, like, a venture partner in a well-funded venture capital company, or they're a serial entrepreneur that have had, you know, win after win after win, and they come up with a 10-page PowerPoint presentation and it just gets funded with a lot of money, and they say, go for it. Some VCs will do that. I haven't met any entrepreneurs that have been funded with a 10-page PowerPoint presentation. That could be because I live on the East Coast, or I used to live on the East Coast, and they're typically more frugal with their money, and they kind of shell it out. They portion it off. they may dedicate a lot of money, or they may think that they're going to be making a large investment, but then they nickel and dime you. So, but having said that, I think it's important that you do have something demonstrable that you're able to put on the web, you're able to put online, or you're able to show people, and then you're able to determine whether or not to move forward with it, or you can pivot. Because if you don't have that, at least, and that typically costs, if you do some sort of flash-based system, or you do an app, we've done a lot of apps together, you know, on your cell phone, you click here and you show people. If you get a lot of positive feedback from that, take it to the next step and actually build the application, the beginning of the application. Don't just show a demo. And
I think that's a very important point, that the demo needs to be in a way that's relatable to people, right? Like, example being, if you had a very big idea and you start talking about this new 3D device that would solve that problem, people would not be able to visualize it, right? Like, it has to be, when you're demoing or when you're showing them the iteration or the MVP, it has to be in a form that people can immediately relate to. Like, it has to be dumbed down to the level that people can immediately relate to without thinking too much, right? I think that's a very important thing, because again, people may or may not be in their best interest to even think about, like, investing an extra cycle of, you know, the brain cycle when they could TikTok instead, to think about your, you know, your groundbreaking idea. I think that's a very important point, that your proof of concept and the demo should be in a form that's very, very familiar. The familiarity has to be there. And then you could show some innovation. Again, the vision should be there for you, to get to that big vision, but it can start. Okay, so that's a very good point. What else,
Yeah.
Jeff? Like from a
So,
business modeling side,
well,
like money
I mean,
wise, how do you test?
well, listen, we're not teaching a college course here, but we're not at the point yet where we're developing a product and we've decided. So, you know, I would say that if you got an investor to back you,
Okay.
that is affirmative response. That is proof that you've got something, whether it's a
Okay.
$10,000 check or 100,000 or a million or 10 million. It's sort of going to be in that range between $10,000 and 10 million. It's a big delta. But that's one other way, which is
So
just go straight
Jeff,
to the
actually,
investors.
you have done that more than once, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and I've
Oh,
seen you
yeah.
do it once
I,
myself.
I,
So
yeah, I did it with Fitmu. I developed a
yeah,
prototype. I got some
what was the
very good.
prototype? I forget. Was that a Flash prototype? What was it?
It
An
was
actual
Flash. Yeah, it was Flash.
presentation? No, it was a
Yeah,
working prototype, right?
working
Yeah.
prototype with Flash. So I knew where to click, and I would do online presentations. This is going back a ways before Zoom. I'd be doing online presentations regularly with people in Puerto Rico on the West Coast. I would collect $20,000 checks, $50,000 checks. I ended up raising for the first tranche from that demo. I ended up raising $350,000, which led to a much bigger round of like 1.5 million, and then it raised 3.5 million after that. So, so the demo worked in terms of raising the seed capital.
Yep.
Some people don't have the resources to do a demo, but they're not terribly expensive to do. And it's just one way of showing people what you're all about, because I've never had success just working from a PowerPoint presentation. I mean, I'd love it if I could, but you want, if you were an investor, you would want the entrepreneur to actually build something and test it to show that there's actually some metrics and KPIs that actually come from the industry. And at least show me something that I can touch and feel. So, show me either revenues you've generated from an inferior product and let's build the right product, or show me some sort of adoption rate that's impressive, or some sort of, or some sort of technology that's really unique. I mean, in the case of Palantir, they're going public pretty soon, actually doing a direct listing. They were valued at once at $20 billion in the private market. Their product's so complex, you couldn't do that with an application, right? You couldn't do it on a cell phone. You couldn't do it on a web app. But they built it. They had a backing with Peter Thiel and Joe Lonsdale, and a couple other big deals in Silicon Valley. And they just built a huge data science company around some problems that governments and large corporate companies had: airline companies, logistics companies, oil companies, hotels, and especially defense. In terms of data, parsing data, understanding it, all that. So how do I mean, they could take their software anywhere and do anything with it. So it's not really a product. It's more of like a consulting company with a technology solution, which is hard to raise money around. So you really have to get a client there, get a client that's willing to pay you a lot of money, and then build the technology around that client. So that's what I'm doing with Smarter Sales, just so you know, is, I had it built by one, I had it built when I was at an organization, and they funded a consultant that I brought in. So I was being paid a salary, but also they brought in the consultant. And in that case, I had proof of concept, but then I took it outside the organization and I spent money on it to build the second version. And once I had the second version built, then I was able to start marketing it to the asset management businesses like the Goldman Sachs and the JP Morgans and other people, Invesco's and
I just had an idea. We should do
yeah,
this podcast and become Shark Tank for like newer
yeah,
ideas.
it's not a bad idea. I love it. Sit there,
Yeah.
listen to these guys. The problem with me, Tij, and I would admit this on Shark Tank
But
if I
you
was
would want
on
to
it,
get involved, so which is a good thing, right?
I would
Everybody
want to
would
get
want to get you
involved. I would
involved.
want to mentor them. I'd want to help them, but
Yeah.
also I would.
For
I'm
my
too
audience,
easily.
I would not do that. I would leave you alone. We can
I'm
just
too
double my
easily.
money.
I'm too easily sold. That's the problem. I'm too easy to be convinced.
Yeah.
Actually, I mean, the Shark Tank companies, to be honest with you, are different from what we're talking about. We're talking about an enterprise level application,
Yeah, that's
and
why
there's
it's different, right? We don't have to call it that.
true. True.
Yeah, look, I think, look, the point is, look, I think you have a big quality, and the reason why you're able to, look, you're not gullible. You have vast knowledge of a lot of subjects, so you actually insert your own intelligence on top of their intelligence, and then you, what I'm saying is sometimes you end up seeing things that the actual presenter might not be seeing. I think that's why you are saying that you're very easily convinced. You're not convinced because you could always inject that extra 20% or 30% that might be missing from the idea
Yeah.
being pitched, right? Because you're like, oh, hold on, I have this other problem. Maybe we can combine these two. Like, and I think anyhow, that's another
Yeah.
tangent that we can think about. But
Yeah.
anyhow, man, lead me to me.
So yeah, go ahead.
Let
No,
me
go
just
back to
give
your.
me my, like, lead B is a very good. Here's my reaction to lead me, right? Just the name itself, like, I think it's doing exactly what it says, which is, hey, lead me. I don't know how to do this, so help me get to this outcome that I want. And then, in phase one, it's helping this, sort of like a micro or macro problem within the real estate world. But the lead me as a platform, this is happening probably across the board. College selection, how do I, maybe just the world of renting, there could be the world of selling, there could be so many problems where people, like, I'll tell you, software buying and selling, right? Like, Gartner plays a big role there. That's what Gartner does for them. Like, they lead them into a solution. So that lead me to me is solving a big problem, and it's very exciting. That's what I would say. It's a very exciting idea.
It is an exciting idea. It's been proven. I really like it. It's interesting because I
And you made money.
mothballed it a while ago, right? To focus
Yeah.
on my private equity business and data science company. So I mothballed it. And actually I did that because I was offered a job at Investec that I took, and with a good friend of mine. And it led to me building Smarter Sales. So I couldn't get out of my own way. I could never stay in a job and just do my job, right? I have to build something. And that's one of the. It's a fucking curse. Trust me. So so LeadMe's interesting. It keeps rearing its ugly head, and it's actually not an ugly head. It's a really good thing. Just last week, I had somebody come to me and say, "Hey, do you have an updated presentation on LeadMe? I'd like to read it, and we may want to combine it with a brokerage group up in Canada and layer in some other technology, and we might want to create a real kind of cool online agency model up there." And I don't know how the Canadian agencies work relative to the US, but I think they're relatively similar. And so I sent that off early last week. And so we'll see what happens this week in terms of the feedback from that. But it's something that I might contribute the IP to this effort in exchange for some equity for the larger picture, and ultimately not go at it alone, but rather join forces with the money piece, with the agency model, and with this other technology, which is more of a CRM for agents. Because CRMs there's another topic of discussion, because there's no good CRM in the entire world that actually works. And I'll go into that discussion in a second with you. But basically, it could be part of a larger solution. So that's the other piece here. Could we build something where we get equity in return and we pre-sell it? Basically, don't wait to go and build it on our own and raise capital and do the typical VC thing, but actually just say, okay, let's integrate this technology, let's build it out on a different platform, and let's take elements of what I've built and apply it to something that already works and already generates revenue. So being incremental to a company that wants to transform itself, basically. So considering doing that right now, and it just keeps coming back and back and back. So the technology hasn't caught up with needs in the real estate market. There's a bunch of different models that have worked and a lot that haven't in the real estate technology space. Real tech, they call it, but it's huge. I mean, we're talking trillions of dollars being spent every year on commissions. Actually, I'm sorry, I think the number is not trillions, but it's about 200 billion in the US alone that's being spent on commissions just for residential homes. That doesn't include rentals, that doesn't include commercial. It's just a huge market on the buy side and the sell side. So there's ample opportunity to wedge yourself in there and provide something. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to take a piece. I don't want people writing checks for me that's going to put them further in the hole, because in the real estate business, you've got a lot of really bright people that are 1099 contract workers that are trying to get by. They're making $25,000, $50,000, $75,000 a year. They're working their asses off. And I don't want them to have to write a $300 a month check to license a CRM. I want their agency to embrace it. I want them to embrace it, but I want it to be free. And I really like the whole sales model that's free. It's contingency based only. I really like that model because it invites more people in to use it because it's free sales for them. We've talked about this before. Like, how do we develop a free sales model? Assist in the sale, get paid on the execution. If you don't,
well,
if we
that's
don't
another
help you
gig economy. That's another gig economy problem. I mean, it's going to happen, Jeff. Like I don't. You will see this happening very soon. I know it's mostly in taxis right now and delivery. It's only a matter of time where people find the definable unit of work. Like the only reason sales is easy to do in the gig economy is because the definition of done is straightforward. The definition of done in sales is sold, right?
Right.
I think right after Ubers have conquered the taxis, because that's the done too. Pick me up from here, drop me off here, done.
Yep.
Sales is right behind in all of that. And you know, your platform talks about how to not just sell, but to enable the selling, right? Like that's, I think if you want to share your screen again and, you know, actually show people what the platform does, I think it'll be helpful because that's what you're doing really. Smarter sales, right? That's what you're talking about.